Hey guys, tonight we are walking barefoot through the mists around Mount Olympus, where the air hums with old rumors and half-forgotten sighs. The marble peaks shimmer under moonlight, but what you really notice are the whispers, those gossipy drafts of ancient breath that slip between temples like nosy pigeons. They're murmuring about love stories the bards didn't bother to sing, affairs that never made it into the heroic scrolls because, honestly, who wants to admit even gods get ghosted? You probably won't survive this mountain climb. You're mortal, remember, but for now, you float here like a drowsy tourist in divine cloud cover, listening to history breathe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind curls warm and smells faintly of pine resin and old ambrosia. You can almost hear lyres tuning somewhere above. Each string vibrates with a story that never reached your school textbook. The forgotten lovers of the gods. The ones who didn't get temples, only rumors. As you drift along the ridge, the first sound that greets you is laughter. Not the booming thunder-ready chuckle of Zeus, but a tired, knowing laugh from some lesser spirit who's seen this all before. It tells you that divinity and desire have always been a messy mix, and immortality doesn't make heartbreak any easier. Below you lies the Valley of Mortals, tiny flickers of campfires glowing like lazy stars. Up here, gossip travels faster than lightning. Did you know that according to one old Greek inscription found near the ruins of Dodona, even Hera once kept a secret admirer who sent her woven peacock feathers as love letters? Historians still argue whether that's symbolic devotion or just an early form of divine fan mail. Either way, it proves the Olympians had more romantic subplots than an entire streaming service catalog. You step carefully along the trail, past carved reliefs of heroes frozen mid-battle, mid-kiss, mid-regret. They remind you that the human and divine worlds overlapped like messy brushstrokes. Somewhere in the haze, a bronze tablet gleams, a record of temple offerings, grapes, incense, goats, and once, apparently, a small statue shaped suspiciously like a heart. A priest must have rolled his eyes at that. The gods didn't exactly need relationship tokens, but mortals kept sending them anyway. The clouds around Olympus shift like curtains opening on an endless stage. You feel the hum of stories pushing at you, each one begging to be told. The first comes from Eos, goddess of the dawn, whose rosy fingers still reach over the horizon every morning. The next glows silver with moonlight. Selene, who fell for a shepherd that wouldn't wake up even for her divine kisses. There's a whisper of reed music from the valley, Pan's hopeless pursuit of Syrinx, whose name still means hollow sound in the language of winds. You can almost see her hair trembling in the breeze, half reed, half memory. But before you tumble into their tales, Olympus itself needs a proper look. You're walking through the hallways of myth's backstage, where clouds serve as walls and constellations are pinned like stage lights. There's Hera's throne of ivory and gold, polished smooth by centuries of side-eye. There's Aphrodite's vanity table, scattered with half-melted candles smelling faintly of sea foam and roses. And over there, Hephaestus' corner, cluttered with prototypes of mechanical birds and a few discarded love notes etched on copper. The smell of hot metal is oddly comforting. You catch yourself wondering whether even divine couples argue about leaving the forge light on. A lightning bolt splits the far sky. Zeus again, probably swiping right on someone else's destiny. You roll your eyes, but gently, because sarcasm might get you smited. A faint chuckle answers. Someone appreciates your sense of humor. Maybe it's Hermes, forever ferrying gossip between heaven and earth. Wing sandals squeaking slightly like an old podcast intro. You pause at the edge of a golden parapet where the wind smells like honey and stone. Below, the Aegean glimmers. This is where myths are born. The blurred border between dream and daylight, between what humans wish for and what gods regret. The forgotten lovers linger here, wrapped in fog and nostalgia. You sense them, a mosaic of longing preserved in divine memory. Fact check for the night. The real Mount Olympus is 2,117 meters high, the tallest peak in Greece, and ancient travelers swore thunder itself lived up there. The modern trailhead near Litocoro leads through forests of beech and fir, where wildflowers still bloom like lost nymphs. A quirky tidbit? In the 1800s, a British mountaineer claimed he saw strange lights flickering near the summit. He thought they were saints. But locals said, just Zeus playing with tourists. You laugh softly. The joke drifts away like incense. Maybe myth never really dies. It just changes marketing. Historians still argue whether Olympus was imagined as a literal mountain home or a metaphor for divine consciousness. Basically, the ancient version of "it's all in your head, bro." The air grows thinner. You step through a veil of aurora-like mist, every color a heartbeat of someone's story. The pink hues feel like dawn, the silver ones like moonlight, and the darker tones pulse with the bass rhythm of underworld love songs. Somewhere far off, a lyre hums a melancholy chord. The melody wraps around you until you can almost feel the weight of eternity pressing on your shoulders, a reminder that even gods measure time by who they've lost. You imagine them drifting across centuries, Eos watching her mortal lover wrinkle away, Selene whispering to her sleeping shepherd, Pan forever playing through his heartbreak, and Hades waiting in endless dusk for someone who actually understands him. It's oddly comforting, realizing immortals are just as emotionally confused as you are before bed. The wind softens. You lie back on a cloud that feels suspiciously like cotton candy and listen as the stories line up quietly, waiting for their turn. Somewhere deep in the golden mist, you can hear the first one stepping forward, dawn cracking open like an eggshell, rosy light spilling across the sleeping world. Eos clears her throat. You're about to learn what happens when the goddess of morning falls in love with a man who can't handle eternity. The sky blushes pink, the horizon yawns awake. And the gossip gets interesting. You drift through the pink horizon where the air smells faintly of dew and pomegranate peel. The dawn rises slow and syrupy, wrapping your shoulders in honey-colored warmth. Somewhere inside that glow, you sense Eos, the goddess of the morning herself, stretching her arms across the world, shaking off sleep and starlight. She's radiant, yes, but also restless. After all, she's been doing this for eternity, and immortality gets lonely fast. Eos, daughter of Hyperion and Theia, sister to Helios the sun and Selene the moon. That's the official family bio, at least according to Hesiod. But you notice how she glances sideways when someone mentions her brother. Apparently being the middle child in a family of celestial show-offs leaves scars deeper than the sky. Every morning, she paints the world's edges with soft light, yet no one ever stops to say, "Nice work, Eos." The mortals praise Helios for rising and Selene for glowing. But dawn is just an intermission. You imagine her pacing the horizon line, clutching her robe of pink clouds, muttering, "I make mornings possible, but sure, let's all clap for the sun again." One day, she decides she's tired of being admired from afar. She wants someone who looks at her not as an event, but as a person, a divine being with feelings, freckles, and maybe a slightly unhealthy relationship with eternal hope. Enter Tithonus, the handsome prince of Troy, who just happens to be wandering near the sea one morning, probably thinking about breakfast. You can almost picture it, the sea breeze flipping his hair like a shampoo commercial, the sunlight catching on his armor, and Eos nearly tripping over her own chariot at the sight. It's love, or at least the celestial equivalent of, "Hey, you up." She sweeps him off his mortal feet, literally, carrying him to her golden palace at the edge of the world. There, surrounded by gardens that bloom only in early light, Eos feels something new, adoration without duty. She wants it forever, and because she's divine but not great at paperwork, she rushes to Zeus to make it official. "Grant my beloved immortality." Now, here's where it gets awkward. In her excitement, Eos forgets a crucial detail. She asks for eternal life, not eternal youth. The wish is granted exactly as stated. Olympian customer service is very literal. At first, Tithonus shines beside her, strong and young, writing poems about the way her hair smells like sunrise. But centuries stretch, and he starts to wrinkle, his voice cracks. One day, Eos wakes to find his laugh gone brittle as dry reeds. She tries to love him still. Really, she does. She brings nectar, sings lullabies, sprinkles ambrosia on his toast. But the years pile like sand. Eventually, Tithonus can no longer walk or speak. His eyes blink weakly, begging for something even immortality can't fix. In some versions, she locks him away in a distant chamber, unable to face what her gift has become. In others, stranger, softer, she transforms him into a cicada, that buzzing insect whose endless summer song still mourns his own lost body. Historians still argue whether the cicada detail was poetic symbolism or a metaphor for eternal consciousness trapped in decay. Either way, next time one hums outside your window at 3 a.m., you might hear Tithonus practicing the world's longest breakup song. A mainstream historical fact slips through the pink haze. The story of Eos and Tithonus was a favorite of Athenian poets in the 5th century BCE. It appears on countless painted vases, tiny figures frozen in sunrise colors. Archaeologists have even found fragments showing her lifting his frail form into the sky, her expression equal parts devotion and despair. The ancients didn't just worship love, they studied its tragic math. A quirky tidbit: in an obscure Byzantine commentary, some monk theorized that Eos invented wrinkles as punishment for human vanity. Imagine blaming your laugh lines on a lovesick goddess. Somewhere, Eos probably rolled her cosmic eyes. The dawn grows warmer. You follow her through the gardens where every flower opens only once a day to greet her. She trails fingers across the petals, murmuring to herself. You notice that despite her immortality, she moves like someone who knows endings. Maybe that's her curse, to love in cycles. Each morning she rises renewed, but her heart remembers every loss, every mortal lover who couldn't keep up with eternity. You think about how time must feel for her, endless repetition of beginning, but never the satisfaction of completion. Like trying to finish a novel that rewrites itself every day before you can turn the page. Eos must envy mortals their brevity. Maybe that's why she keeps falling for them. They burn out quickly, leaving her the only one awake at the edge of time. Some scholars suggest Eos's story is older than the Olympians themselves. She may trace back to a dawn goddess from Indo-European myth, the same root that gave us Ushas in Vedic hymns and Aurora in Roman tales. Different names, same yearning, the sky's first blush, reaching for what it can't hold. Historians still argue whether this shared motif proves a single ancient source or just humanity's universal crush on sunrise. You step into her palace, no doors, just veils of mist. The floor glows like polished quartz. Tithonus lies nearby, frail as paper, his breathing slow and whispery. Eos kneels beside him, brushing his hair back with the tenderness of habit. "You still see me?" she asks softly. His eyes flicker like dawn itself, half light, half memory. Outside, the world wakes again. Birds sing, unaware they're echoing a goddess's heartbreak. You lean against a column, feeling strangely human amid all this immortality. Because the story isn't really about gods. It's about wanting something to last when everything fades. One final image burns behind your eyes. Eos lifting the sky on her shoulders, her tears falling as dew, each drop catching the sun's first fire. Somewhere within that shimmering sorrow, you hear her whisper to Tithonus, "Sleep if you must, but I'll rise for both of us." And just like that, dawn turns to day, and your mind drifts forward, chasing another love tangled in silver moonlight. The sunlight fades, dissolving into a milky dusk, and you follow the fading warmth down a slope of whispering olive trees. The air cools, soft and silver, as if it's exhaling after holding its breath all morning. Above you, the moon lifts, slow, deliberate, and proud. She's not a reflection of anyone. She is the light itself. Selene, goddess of the moon, is awake, and she's already watching someone. You feel her before you see her. The air thickens, like water around your skin. Her chariot wheels, silver as fish scales, cut across the twilight. 4 pale horses snort mist, their hooves silent against the dark. And there she is, hair spilling like a comet's tail, eyes calm and ancient as tidal sleep. She doesn't look at you. Her gaze is fixed somewhere far below, where the mountains dip into shadow. You follow her line of sight and find a shepherd. He's lying on a grassy hill, wrapped in a wool cloak, his crook beside him. Endymion, just a mortal boy, maybe 20, with a face too peaceful for anyone who works for a living. You wonder if he knows a goddess is watching. Probably not. He's dreaming about sheep, or maybe lunch. But Selena's expression softens like the moon over still water. She's already lost. Selene drives her chariot lower, lowering her brightness so she won't wake him. You trail behind, feeling like an intruder at the quietest moment in existence. When her feet touch the ground, the grass glows faintly, frost-kissed by moonlight. She kneels beside Endymion, tracing a finger along his jaw. It's an intimate gesture, tender but tragic, because you know how this story goes. Or maybe you only think you do. According to the old poets, Selene begged Zeus to grant Endymion eternal sleep, so she could visit him night after night without ever losing him to age or dawn. A twisted kind of devotion, right? The world's first long-distance relationship, except one of you can't move and the other controls the tides. Historians still argue whether the myth was meant as a romantic parable or a cautionary tale about divine obsession. The mainstream fact, The earliest surviving reference to this story comes from a fragment of Sappho, written sometime in the 6th century BCE. The poet describes the moon descending with silver sandals to seek the boy of Latmos. That's Mount Latmos, by the way, a real mountain in modern-day Turkey. Archaeologists have found an ancient sanctuary carved into its cliffs dedicated to Endymion, proving that once upon a time, people genuinely worshipped a man who slept forever. Not a bad gig, really. The quirky tidbit? In some Hellenistic commentaries, Endymion was said to count the moon's phases as part of his shepherding duties, literally keeping watch on Selene's cycle like some celestial night shift worker. Imagine your time card depending on lunar brightness. You'd never get consistent hours. Selene leans closer, whispering something you can't quite catch. Maybe a promise, maybe an apology. The stars brighten at her words like eavesdropping fireflies. She loves him because he doesn't chase her. Every god, every mortal she's ever met tries to hold her, to name her, to make her constant. But Endymion just sleeps. In his stillness, she finds the only peace she's ever known. And yet, what kind of love is that? You tilt your head, watching her brush a lock of hair from his forehead. She's weeping silently, but her tears turn to dew before they touch the earth. The scholars in dusty offices will later debate what this symbolizes: love transcending time, or the loneliness of eternal desire. You, standing here in the silver dark, just feel the ache of it, the way her light bends around his body, gentle as breath. She whispers again, "You dream me, don't you?" Maybe he does. Maybe somewhere inside his endless slumber, he walks beside her under star-woven skies, free from the weight of waking life. You imagine that dream, a vast meadow lit only by her glow, where the two of them dance in slow motion. No words, no aging, no mornings, just the rhythm of eternity. But there's another version of the myth, one that doesn't get much airtime. In it, Zeus punishes Endymion with eternal sleep for daring to love the moon, jealous as always of mortals who attract divine attention. In that telling, Selene isn't a manipulator, but a mourner, doomed to watch the man she loves frozen forever because of her affection. Historians still argue whether this reversal was an early feminist retelling or just a case of mythic gossip gone wild. The moon climbs higher. Selene reluctantly stands, brushing her robe of light back into place. She turns to you as if suddenly aware of your presence. Her eyes flash, not angry, just infinitely tired. You realize she's been repeating this ritual for millennia, each night reliving both love and loss. You think about your own cycles, how you check your phone before bed, scrolling through faces you'll forget by morning. Maybe that's your version of worship, chasing light that will never stay. A breeze rustles the grass, and you hear the faint hum of cicadas in the distance, a callback to poor Tithonus, still buzzing somewhere out there, trying to outsing eternity. You can't help but smirk. Even in mythology, exes find ways to photobomb. Selene mounts her chariot again, her horses snorting moonfire. She glances down one last time at the shepherd, her voice barely a ripple. "Sleep well, my love. I'll be back tomorrow." Then she lifts off, a silver arc through the velvet sky, leaving the world bathed in quiet glow. Below, Endymion's chest rises and falls, steady as tides. You wonder if he hears her wheels in his dreams, if somewhere inside that endless rest, he smiles. Maybe sleep isn't a curse for him at all. Maybe it's mercy. As the chariot fades beyond the horizon, the world feels softer. You lie back in the meadow beside the shepherd, the grass cool against your neck. The moonlight paints your eyelids, and for a moment you understand why Selene couldn't stay away. It's the calm of knowing nothing can change, and nothing has to. But you're still awake, and the story isn't done. Somewhere in the distance, a reed flute begins to play, a haunting hollow melody that sounds like the wind trying to remember a face. The notes drift toward you, wild and uneven. The moon's glow trembles. You can almost see the musician now chasing his tune through the marsh, desperate for something that no longer exists. It's time to meet the god of wild things and his lost love who became music itself. You follow the sound, thin, tremulous, and lonely, through a marsh that smells of rain and mint. The moon hangs low behind you, silver light sliding across the reeds like liquid glass. Somewhere nearby, a flute keeps playing, not perfectly, not even tunefully, just insistently. The notes wander, circle, stop, and start again, like someone trying to remember the rhythm of happiness. You push through the tall stalks until you see him, half goat, half man, and entirely unbothered by pants. Pan. He's sitting on a rock at the edge of a stream, his hooves tapping idly, his horns glinting like polished amber. His beard is a mess, his grin feral but strangely sweet. You'd think being the god of shepherds, wild nature, and sudden panic attacks, yes, that's where panic comes from, would make him terrifying. But right now, he just looks tired, like someone who's told the same joke for centuries and still laughs at it anyway. "Don't sneak up on me," he says, not turning. His voice crackles like dry leaves. "Unless you're music." You tell him you've been following the song. He chuckles. Then you've been following a ghost. The flute in his hands isn't carved from wood or bone, but a cluster of hollow reeds. Uneven lengths bound with wax. He lifts it to his lips again, and the melody sighs. It's a sad tune, but not hopeless. More like acceptance shaped into sound. "This," he says between breaths, "used to be her." You glance around, confused. "Her?" "Syrinx," he murmurs, eyes on the water. "A nymph of Arcadia. Fastest thing on 2 legs, and none of them ever wanted me to catch up." You can picture it, the shaggy god crashing through forests, laughter and branches colliding, his heart pounding faster than his hooves. Syrinx, nimble as a deer, running toward the river to escape him. In one version, she pleads with the river nymphs to save her. They answer by transforming her into a bundle of reeds right as Pan reaches out to grab her. Imagine his face, the shock, the disbelief, the guilt of realizing your crush just turned into landscaping. The wind blew through the reeds, making a soft, mournful sound. Pan, stunned and ashamed, cut a few stalks and bound them together. That first sigh of wind through them became music, the echo of what he lost. He calls it the Syrinx. We call it the pan flute. Either way, every note he plays is a love letter to someone who escaped him. You watch him now, eyes half closed, body swaying gently to the rhythm. The melody curls upward, caught by the wind, floating across the marsh like memory. A mainstream historical fact. The story of Pan and Syrinx appears in Ovid's Metamorphoses, written around 8 CE, where it serves as a poetic explanation for how the pan flute came to exist. The myth's imagery, reeds, pursuit, transformation, became one of the most popular motifs in Roman art. Sculptures of Pan with his pipes adorned gardens and fountains. Little reminders that even wild gods crave beauty. A quirky tidbit? In 19th century rural Greece, shepherds still carried handmade Syrinx flutes and believed playing them at dusk would keep away nightmares. Some swore that if the melody faltered, Pan himself was near, kind of the ancient equivalent of your Bluetooth speaker randomly connecting to an unknown device. You sit beside him listening as the night deepens. The marsh hums, frogs croak, crickets chirp, and the breeze keeps time. Pan's eyes are lost somewhere beyond the trees. You'd think immortality makes heartbreak easier, he says, blowing another note that trembles like laughter choking on a tear. But eternity just means more time to replay it. You ask him if he's angry with Syrinx. He shakes his head. Anger's for mortals. I'm just full. He pats his chest. Full of sound, full of wanting. I chase. The world runs. It's the rhythm of everything. Even you humans do it. Chase things that change shape when you reach out. He's not wrong. You think about your own pursuits, jobs, people, peace of mind, all slipping through your fingers just when you think you've caught them. Maybe Pan isn't wild at all. Maybe he's just honest. The god stands, stretches, and gestures for you to follow. Come on. She doesn't like when I play too long in one spot. You trail after him, reeds brushing your legs like whispers. He walks on bare hooves that barely dent the mud, humming as he goes. The forest around you seems to lean closer, listening. Historians still argue whether Pan was originally a minor Arcadian fertility deity or an imported rustic spirit that spread through Greece like folklore moss. What they agree on is his strangeness, part divine, part beast, unpolished, unashamed. The Athenians once mocked him for his lusty escapades. Later, they built him a cave shrine after he supposedly saved them at Marathon by terrifying their enemies with invisible panic. Divine PR really does work wonders. Pan stops beside a pool where the moonlight ripples. She lives here now, he says softly. Not the body, the sound. He kneels, dips the flute in the water, and blows. The bubbles shimmer, and for a moment you swear the reeds hum back. It's not imagination. The air vibrates, a faint echo of laughter hidden in the tone. You listen harder, and suddenly you hear Syrinx, playful, teasing, free. She's not trapped in the flute. She's become the music itself, escaping forever into wind and memory. Pan lowers the pipes, smiling with something like pride. See, she's happier like this. No one can catch music. You sit in silence for a while, the world holding its breath. The reeds sway, whispering secrets to the night. Somewhere nearby, an owl hoots, probably judgmentally, but you let it slide. Finally, Pan looks at you and grins, a flash of wild teeth. Careful, he says. The gods always get jealous when mortals start listening too closely. Makes them think you're falling in love with their stories. You laugh softly, but it's true. These tales have a way of sneaking under your skin, the way moonlight seeps into water, slowly, completely. Pan's flute begins again, softer this time, almost a lullaby. The melody drifts toward the horizon, where the stars hang like suspended fireflies. You follow it through the trees, each note leading you deeper into shadow. The music fades, replaced by a new sound, distant rumbling, like thunder waking from a nap. The air thickens, heavy with earth and mystery. You smell ash and stone and something darker. Pomegranate wine, maybe. The ground trembles faintly beneath your feet. It's colder here, the wind whispering down from somewhere deep below. Pan gives a low whistle. Ah, the underworld stirring. Time to meet the quietest lover of them all. You step forward, toward the soundless gate where sunlight ends. The ground softens under your feet, turning from grass to dust, from dust to shadow. The warmth of Pan's marsh fades behind you, replaced by a cool breath that smells faintly of minerals and something older than sorrow. You step into a canyon split like a wound in the earth. Somewhere below, the rumbling continues, not thunder this time, but the low hum of eternity grinding its teeth. A shape moves within the dark, not frightening, just inevitable. Hades doesn't really arrive. He appears, like a thought you've been avoiding. His eyes glow faintly, not red like fire, but gray like smoke after rain. His cloak shifts between colors, black, purple, rust, like it can't decide which mood fits tonight. He studies you for a moment before saying, in a voice so even it's almost gentle, "You're early." You tell him you're just passing through. He nods. They all say that. The underworld stretches behind him, a landscape of quiet logic, rivers that run in circles, poplar trees that never shed their leaves, and fields where shades drift like slow-moving dreams. It's peaceful in a way, no screaming, no torment, just the soft bureaucracy of eternity. You imagine death here feels like being stuck in the world's most silent waiting room. Before Persephone, Hades had other company, lovers who flicker through history like candles no one bothered to name properly. Some myths whisper of Luce, a nymph so pale she could have been made from moonlight. When she died, Hades turned her into a white poplar tree beside the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. That's his kind of romance, grief you can plant. You pass the tree now, its leaves flashing silver and green, like they can't decide which side of life they belong to. A cool breeze rustles through the branches, and you swear you hear a sigh. Maybe she remembers. Maybe she doesn't. There's another name floating in the dark, Minthe, a nymph of the Cocytus River, who once bragged she would be Hades' true queen. Persephone didn't like that. The story goes that she, or Demeter, depending on which angry goddess you ask, crushed Minthe underfoot, transforming her into the mint plant. The scent still lingers in the air, sharp and clean, like gossip that's lasted 3,000 years. You kneel, crush a leaf between your fingers, and inhale. It's refreshing, alive, and faintly bitter. Pan would probably love it in a cocktail. A mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks placed mint leaves in tombs, believing the scent purified the soul for its journey. It wasn't just a garnish. It was sacred breath, a bridge between the living and the dead. You realize that the myth of Minthe may have been less about divine jealousy and more about ritual memory, the way scent ties emotion to eternity. The quirky tidbit? In some rural Greek villages, women used to sprinkle mint water on their doorsteps before bed to keep the underworld polite. Supposedly, it worked better than any lock. Hades walks beside you now, hands clasped behind his back, like an overworked accountant. "They always make me the villain," he mutters, "but I'm not cruel, I just keep order." His tone is flat but not defensive, more like someone too tired to correct millennia of bad PR. You glance around, souls drift past like mist, not suffering, just existing. Some hum softly, lost in half-remembered songs. One ghost pauses to wave at you. You wave back. It's oddly comforting, this quiet crowd. Hades notices your expression. "People imagine fire and punishment," he says, "but really it's just continuity. Nothing ends here." It just changes texture. You ask him if he ever misses the living world. He smiles faintly. "The living world misses me more." There's a weight in his words, a loneliness you hadn't expected. You realize that even gods get misunderstood. Maybe that's why he loved Luce and Minthe, women who saw him not as a shadow, but as something worth touching. You wonder if that's what Persephone saw too. But she's not here yet. That's another season. For now you're walking through the quiet before the myth everyone remembers. The walls of the cavern glow faintly, carved with scenes that shimmer like submerged memories. A young Hades offering fruit to a mortal woman, a goddess planting a tree, a river flowing backward. You touch one carving and feel a pulse of cold. Careful, Hades says. They echo emotion. You pull your hand back. Whose emotion? All of them, he replies. You walk on, the air thinning until it feels like breathing in silk. The stillness is so absolute, it amplifies your thoughts. Maybe that's what eternity is, your mind echoing louder than the world. No wonder the dead whisper so much. Historians still argue whether the pre-Persephone myths were meant to humanize Hades or simply foreshadow his eventual claim to balance. Some believe the Luce and Minthe stories were late additions, moral lessons about fidelity and humility. Others think they're remnants of older earth rituals, fragments of agricultural myth layered beneath later Olympian edits. But here, surrounded by quiet roots and silver light, it doesn't feel like a lesson. It feels like mourning that never learned when to stop. You reach a riverbank where the current hums low and steady. The water looks black until the moonlight, Selene's reflection again, loyal traveler, reveals its true color, dark blue, almost comforting. Hades kneels, dips a hand into the water, and flicks a drop towards you. It lands cold on your cheek, like the world's politest blessing. Do you know why mortals fear me? He asks. You shake your head. Because I don't lie to them. I never promise more time. That honesty settles deep in your chest, heavier than grief, softer than truth. You think about Eos and her immortal lover, about Selene and her eternal sleeper. The gods keep trying to cheat time, but Hades accepts it, guards it even. Maybe that's why his realm feels so peaceful. The wind sighs through the poplars again. The leaves shimmer, whispering something that sounds like forgiveness. You can almost make out Luce's voice in the rustle. He wasn't cruel, just careful. You thank Hades for letting you wander here. He inclines his head, the faintest smile on his lips. Be gentle with the living world, he says. It breaks easily. Then the ground trembles softly beneath your feet, not with menace, but with rhythm, like distant drums. The air warms, shifting from mineral chill to something sunlit, golden, and proud. You know that sound, the heartbeat of Apollo's chariot wheels rolling across the sky. The underworld begins to fade, its edges turning to mist. You take one last look at the silver trees, the quiet river, the God who guards both endings and beginnings. Then you step upward toward the sound of music that isn't mourning, but longing in a different key. The darkness thins until it's only shadow at the edges of your vision, and light pours through like water breaking a dam. The air smells different up here. Sun-warmed laurel leaves, cedar smoke, and something sharp and metallic, like lightning captured in a bottle. You blink, and the underworld gives way to a mountaintop bathed in radiant gold. That's when you see him, lounging with the kind of posture that says, I know I'm beautiful, and I'm fine with it. Apollo, the god of sunlight, prophecy, music, and medicine, though tonight he looks more like the god of overconfidence. His golden hair shines even brighter than the sky behind him, his bow rests at his side, and his lyre gleams as if it polishes itself. You try not to stare, but the smugness is hypnotic. He catches your glance, grins, and strums a few notes that ripple across the air like warm honey. Mortals always look surprised, he says, his voice bright but tired underneath. You expected me to glow more? You admit that maybe you did. He laughs softly. Everyone does. For all his light, Apollo carries an odd melancholy, the kind that comes from loving too hard and too often. You notice the empty spaces around him, places in memory where laughter used to echo. He must feel them too, because when he picks up his lyre again, the melody that flows out is soft, almost wistful. It begins with Daphne. You can feel her presence in the rhythm, the rush of feet on forest soil, the panic of wind, the heartbeat of flight. She was a nymph devoted to Artemis, sworn to remain untouched by love. Apollo, fresh from a victory over the serpent Python, strutted through the woods feeling invincible. And of course, that's exactly when Cupid decided to humble him with one of those trick arrows, gold-tipped for desire. Daphne got the opposite kind, lead-tipped for rejection. You can see it unfold as Apollo plucks the strings. His sudden obsession, her desperate flight, his hand brushing her shoulder as she calls out to her father, the river god Peneus. The air thickens, her body hardens into bark, her hair turns to leaves. The laurel tree shivers where a woman once stood. Apollo kneels, heart breaking and pride wounded, and whispers, "Since you cannot be mine, you shall be my symbol." He takes a branch, weaves a wreath, and wears it forever after. A love story petrified into fashion. The music falters, then changes key, lower, more sorrowful. "You think that was cruel?" Apollo murmurs. Try watching someone die because they loved you back. You feel the temperature drop slightly, the gold light dimming to violet. This song is older, sadder, the story of Hyacinthus. The mortal prince was Apollo's favorite companion, bright and reckless. They spent their days throwing discus and teasing each other about who could aim straighter. One afternoon, the game turned deadly. The discus, thrown by Apollo, struck Hyacinthus in the head. Blood spilled onto the grass. The god tried to heal him, begged every herb and hymn to reverse fate, but nothing worked. From that blood sprang a flower, the hyacinth, its petals curling like letters. Some say they spell AI, the Greek cry for alas. A mainstream historical fact. Ancient Spartans celebrated the Hyacinthia festival each summer, honoring both the young man and Apollo himself. It mixed mourning and joy, first a day of grief, then one of music and feasting. Historians still argue whether it commemorated an actual ritual death or symbolized the cycle of seasons, but either way, the petals still whisper the god's name. A quirky tidbit? In the 17th century, travelers swore that hyacinths grew only where lightning struck, claiming it was Apollo's mark on the earth. Turns out they just liked good lighting for their myths. Apollo looks at the horizon, his voice softening. "I never stopped hearing the wind over that field." He strums again, and this time the melody is sharp, tense, like prophecy itself grinding its teeth. And then there was Cassandra. The name tastes like smoke. You see her, a princess of Troy, brilliant eyes that saw too much. Apollo offered her the gift of prophecy if she would love him. She accepted the gift, but rejected him. Classic mistake. Divine egos bruise easily. In revenge, he left her cursed. Her prophecies would always be true, but no one would ever believe her. Historians still argue whether that myth was a metaphor for ignored wisdom or a political critique of how women's voices were dismissed in patriarchal cultures. You can practically hear the ancient philosophers furrowing their brows over it. Apollo plucks the final string, the note sharp and brittle, and sets the lyre aside. She warned them, he says quietly, about the horse, the fire, the fall. They laughed. They always laugh before they burn. He exhales, and even the sunlight dims with him. You want to comfort him, but what do you say to a god who's both the healer and the wound? His entire existence seems built on contradictions, beauty that destroys, truth that hurts, love that punishes. He turns toward you, eyes reflecting more than light now. You know the curse of perfection? He asks. Nothing can surprise you, and without surprise, there's no joy, only repetition. That hits harder than you expect. You realize how many of his loves were doomed not by cruelty, but by the monotony of divinity. When you know how everything ends, what's left to chase? A breeze rolls through, carrying the faint scent of sea salt and storm. Apollo lifts his head, sniffing the air like a hunter catching a familiar trail. Ah, he says, smiling faintly, that jealous fool. Poseidon's awake again. You ask if you should be worried. He chuckles. Only if you like dry clothes. The god of the sun stretches, light flaring around him. Go, follow the wind east. You'll find him where the waves argue with the cliffs. Tell him I said he still owes me a trident polish. Before you can answer, the world dissolves into brightness. The scent of salt water grows stronger, the sound of waves crashes louder, and sunlight turns into spray. The gold fades to deep turquoise, and you find yourself standing at the edge of a stormy sea. The wind roars, and somewhere beneath it, a voice booms, loud, proud, and a little defensive. Poseidon, god of the deep, has stories to tell too. The wind slaps your face with a mouthful of salt and attitude. Waves crash against the rocks like they're auditioning for a percussion solo. Everything smells of brine and thunder. You're standing at the lip of the Aegean, and the sea is restless tonight. The horizon quivers, all silver foam and shifting blue. Until something, someone, rises from it, sculpted from water and ego. Poseidon, he's not quite what you expect. Less merman, more shipwrecked royalty. His hair tangles with seaweed, his beard drips pearls, and his eyes are the exact color of "Don't test me." He carries his trident like it's both a weapon and a walking stick. When he speaks, the air itself vibrates, like every drop of water nearby is listening for orders. You've been with my brother's favorites, he says, smirking. Zeus gets the skies, Hades gets the depths, and I get the good view. He gestures around at the endless ocean. You nod, pretending you're not a little intimidated by a being who could drown you with one raised eyebrow. But Poseidon isn't here to threaten. He's in the mood to reminisce. And, as you soon learn, that's a dangerous mood for gods with long memories and longer grudges. He scoops a handful of seawater, lets it drip through his fingers, and says, "Mortals think love makes you soft. They forget the tides are ruled by it." You sit on a barnacled rock as the sea god begins his confessional. The waves calm slightly, like the world itself is leaning closer to eavesdrop. The first name he mentions is Amphitrite, his official wife, a Nereid, one of the 50 sea daughters of Nereus. She didn't exactly swoon when Poseidon proposed. In fact, she fled across the ocean to escape him, hiding among the sea creatures near Atlas's edge. Classic divine courtship, Chase first, talk later. Poseidon, sulking, sent dolphins to plead his case. One of them, probably the original wingman, found Amphitrite and convinced her to return. Out of gratitude, Poseidon placed the dolphin among the stars as the constellation Delphinus, a mainstream historical fact. Delphinus is still visible today in the summer sky, faint but loyal, symbolizing both persuasion and peace. Historians still argue whether the myth was meant to soften Poseidon's reputation or explain ancient sailors' reverence for dolphins. Amphitrite forgave me, Poseidon says, staring out at the waves. But forgiveness and love aren't the same tide. His voice drops lower, rough as sand against metal. There were others. The sea darkens. You sense movement, currents curling like memories beneath the surface. The first face to rise is that of Medusa, before the curse, before the snakes. She was once a priestess of Athena, golden-haired and serene. Poseidon's tone grows heavy. They call it violation, he murmurs. But the temple was ours. We met in secrecy. Or maybe she didn't see it that way. The story splits like a current at a reef. Some say Poseidon forced her. Others claim it was mutual desire punished by Athena's wrath. Historians still argue whether the myth reflects divine rivalry or ancient attempts to rationalize violence. You don't need to choose a version to feel how haunted he sounds. Even gods carry shame. I gave her children, he says softly. They became monsters to the world, but to me, they were just loud. You picture Pegasus bursting from Medusa's severed neck, wings gleaming, carrying both grief and beauty into the air. The irony isn't lost on Poseidon either. Even from ruin, he sighs, something flies. The sea grows lighter again, the waves glittering like scattered coins. Then there was Scylla, he continues, smiling wistfully, beautiful, vain, curious. She wouldn't even look at me. When he finally won her attention, it wasn't love she found. Amphitrite, jealous, poured a potion into Scylla's bathing pool. The nymph transformed into a many-headed monster, doomed to haunt the straits of Messina. I tried to save her, Poseidon says, shaking his head, but you can't unmix poison. A quirky tidbit, sailors used to toss a handful of flour into the sea before passing through those straits, to feed Scylla and keep her calm. Ancient maritime superstition, yes, but also a strange kind of empathy for a monster who never asked to be made one. You watch Poseidon as he walks along the surf, the foam curling around his ankles like affectionate pets. For all his power, he moves like someone carrying guilt instead of pride. Maybe love doesn't soften gods. It exposes them. Mortals think I rage, he says, but the sea isn't anger. It's repetition, the same waves over and over, breaking where they must. It's not fury. It's persistence. You wonder aloud if persistence ever turns into peace. Poseidon laughs, not cruelly, but like a storm finally letting go. Peace. Ask the tide to stop. It will only answer with another wave. He turns to you, water dripping from his beard. You know what happens when you love too many? You end up ruling everything that slips away. That line sits with you. The ocean hums louder, echoing the heartbeat of everything temporary. A gust of wind tears through the air, lifting your hair, and suddenly the horizon flares with pale blue light. Somewhere above, the moon flickers again, but this time it's different. Cooler, cleaner, wilder. You feel the pulse of something swift and graceful, arrows slicing through clouds, footsteps on forest leaves, the hush of night animals, listening. Poseidon grins knowingly. Ah, the huntress wakes, my niece, always pretending she doesn't feel what she feels. He points inland, where a silver mist rises over pine trees. Go find her. She's pretending to chase deer, but it's a man she's running from or toward. Hard to tell. You step off the rock, shoes wet, body humming with salt. Behind you, Poseidon's laughter echoes like surf on stone, ancient, amused, maybe a little envious. As you walk toward the forest, the roar of the sea fades into a rhythmic drumbeat. Footsteps, heartbeats, hooves. The air cools again, pine-scented, thick with moonlight. You can almost see her, tall, fierce, eyes like cold fire. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, the untouchable maiden. But tonight, her story won't stay pure. Tonight, she's remembering Orion. The forest hums in silver. You step beneath branches glazed with moonlight, their needles whispering secrets in the cool air. The sea's roar fades behind you, replaced by the soft percussion of crickets and distant hooves. Every sound here feels deliberate, like a heartbeat stretched thin across centuries. You're in Artemis's domain now, the wilds, the spaces between breath and silence. The goddess moves before you like a ripple of light between trees. Her tunic flashes white against the darkness, her bow strung but idle, her hair bound in a knot that somehow still looks effortless. She doesn't turn when she speaks. Mortals shouldn't wander this deep. Her tone isn't unkind, just factual, like gravity announcing itself. You tell her you've come to listen, not to hunt. That earns you a glance over her shoulder, sharp and curious. Her eyes are clear gray, calm and distant, but something flickers behind them. Fatigue, maybe, or memory. Then tread softly, she says. Some ghosts here wear familiar faces. You follow as she glides through the undergrowth, moonlight trailing her steps. Every leaf seems to bend toward her, like the forest itself is loyal. But not everything here obeys. You hear, somewhere in the distance, laughter. Low, confident, human. Orion, she says before you can ask. His name rolls off her tongue like the echo of thunder that never quite arrives. You've heard of him, of course, the giant hunter, companion of Artemis. But the version she tells is softer, more personal. He wasn't afraid of me, she begins, touching the trunk of a pine. That was his first mistake. In the beginning, Orion was simply a mortal who could match her pace. He ran beside her through dawn-lit meadows, waded into rivers without asking permission, and laughed when she shot arrows too close to his ear. For a goddess who prided herself on solitude, that laughter was inconvenient. It followed her like a melody she couldn't ignore. One night, beneath a sky the color of polished silver, he pointed up at the constellations. One day, he said, they'll put us up there too. Artemis had scoffed, but now, remembering, she looks at the same stars through the canopy, and her silence feels heavier than pride. Historians still argue whether Artemis and Orion were lovers, friends, or rivals. Some ancient poets described their bond as a partnership of equals. Others, more scandalized, insisted their closeness was a cosmic threat to chastity itself. The myths fracture like glass the deeper you look. But as Artemis walks beside you now, her voice softens into confession. He was too proud, she murmurs, too curious. He said he could hunt anything on earth, even beasts sacred to me. Her jaw tightens. That's when Gaia heard him boasting. The earth goddess, insulted by Orion's arrogance, sent a scorpion from the ground to sting him. The wound was mortal. Artemis found him on the edge of the sea, his skin already cooling under her moonlight. She knelt beside him, fury, and grief twined like ivy, and in that impossible stillness she begged her father Zeus to preserve him somehow. So Zeus placed Orion among the stars, a glittering figure forever chasing the Pleiades across the night sky. A mainstream historical fact, the constellation Orion is one of the oldest recognized star patterns appearing in Mesopotamian texts over 4,000 years ago. Its association with a hunter predates Greek myth entirely. Scholars think the Greeks simply borrowed the shape and gave it a personality, one tragic enough to fit their love for poetic irony. A quirky tidbit: in ancient Greece, sailors used Orion's belt as a celestial calendar. Its rising at dawn marked the start of the stormy sailing season. Even now, if you wake before sunrise in winter, you might see him climbing the sky and think of Artemis watching, arms crossed, pretending she doesn't still look. But there's another version, one whispered like forbidden prayer, that Apollo, Artemis's twin brother, grew jealous of Orion, not of the mortal himself, but of his sister's affection. Fearing she'd fallen in love, Apollo tricked her. He pointed to a tiny speck moving across the sea and dared her to shoot it, mocking her aim. Never one to refuse a challenge, Artemis drew her bow and hit the mark cleanly. Only later did the tide wash Orion's body ashore. Historians still argue whether this version was an allegory for divine rivalry or a moral about pride disguised as love. You can see the doubt flicker in her eyes even now, thousands of years later. If it's true, she says quietly, then even perfection can be fooled by cruelty. The forest around you sighs. The wind through the branches sounds like her breath catching. You want to tell her she did what anyone might, believed her brother, trusted her skill, but the words feel too small for immortality. Instead, you ask what she did after. I turn the scorpion into stars too, she says simply. Balance demands symmetry. You both look up. The constellation Scorpius hangs opposite Orion in the night sky, forever chasing him. When one rises, the other sets. Two stories chasing but never meeting again. There's poetry in that, the kind that hurts if you think too long. Artemis sits on a fallen log, bow resting across her knees. For the first time she looks tired, not physically, but spiritually, like someone who's carried her own legend too far. They say I don't feel love, she says, but love and loss are twins. I just chose the one that doesn't scream. A moth flutters past, glowing faintly in her moonlight. She reaches out, lets it land on her palm, then releases it again. Her eyes follow its flight, softening. He used to say the stars were holes where the gods peek through to remember us. Maybe he was right. The night hums quietly, the same rhythm you felt when Pan played his flute and Selene brushed her sleeping shepherd's cheek. Even gods, it seems, can't escape the gravity of memory. Artemis stands, bow over her shoulder, posture returning to divine precision. Go, she says gently. The forge burns again, and someone down there is trying to shape love from metal. You look toward the horizon. A faint orange glow pulses beyond the trees, warm, rhythmic, mechanical. The sound of hammer against anvil cuts through the cricket's song. As you turn to leave, Artemis calls after you, her voice almost playful again. Tell him, she says, that beauty without patience breaks faster than bronze. You nod. The forest fades behind you as you follow the scent of smoke and molten fire. The air thickens with heat, and soon the stars dim beneath a haze of forge light. Sparks flicker in the distance, bright as tiny suns. You can already hear the clank of metal and the muttered curses of a god whose heart burns hotter than his work. Hephaestus is waiting. The world grows warmer, denser, until each breath tastes faintly of iron and coal. The night silver dissolves into orange, and the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal beats like a heartbeat trapped in bronze. You step into a cavern that glows as though it swallows daylight and spits out fire. Sparks tumble through the air, brief meteors that burn, then fade into ash before they can land. Hephaestus is there, broad-shouldered, soot-streaked, limping slightly as he moves between anvils. His left leg drags, the result of that famous fall from Olympus when Zeus hurled him down for defending Hera. It's said he hit the sea so hard the waves remembered. But what the myths forget to tell you is how quietly he got back up again. He looks up when you enter, eyes glinting gold through the smoke. "Careful where you step," he says. "I lose apprentices to melted ambition all the time." His voice is deep but kind, like gravel softened by years of solitude. You ask what he's making, and he grins. Something no one asked for, but that's art, isn't it? He gestures to a half-formed sculpture on the bench, gleaming under molten light. It's not a weapon, not a tool. It's a face, smooth, delicate, almost human. "She was going to be perfect," he murmurs. "Too perfect, maybe." You realize you're looking at one of his first masterpieces, Pandora. Crafted from clay at Zeus's command, she was meant to be both a gift and a punishment for humankind. Hephaestus shaped her features with care, every curve a prayer for affection he knew he wouldn't receive. Zeus said make her beautiful, he recalls. But beauty's just the polite mask of cruelty, isn't it? He wipes sweat from his brow with a soot-blackened arm. "They talk about her box, the one full of evils," he says. But no one asks who made the lid fit tight enough to keep hope trapped inside. The hammer rings again, scattering echoes through the forge. You can almost see the ghosts of his other creations flickering in the corners, automatic golden servants, jewelry that hums faint lullabies, chains so fine they bind gods without them noticing. A mainstream historical fact. In ancient Athens, Hephaestus had his own festival, the Hephaestia, celebrated alongside Athena. The two were considered partners of intellect and craft, proof that brilliance often comes from collaboration, not competition. Archaeologists have found small terracotta offerings shaped like hammers and anvils left in his honor, tokens from blacksmiths who saw a bit of themselves in the limping god. A quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe the ancient Greek word for spark, spinther, was inspired by the image of Hephaestus's forge and literally means seed of fire. If true, it makes him the god not only of craft but of beginnings, the one who plants invention into the dark and waits for it to bloom. He sets the hammer down and sighs. "They like to tell the story of my marriage to Aphrodite," he says, as if that's the punchline of a cosmic joke. His smile is brittle. The lame smith and the goddess of beauty. Sounds like a moral, doesn't it? You remember the tale, how Zeus forced Aphrodite to marry Hephaestus as a kind of ironic justice, how she spent most of that marriage in the arms of Ares, the god of war. It's a myth everyone knows, but not the way Hephaestus tells it now. "She didn't love me," he admits, "but she was honest about it. I respected that. Most gods pretend." He turns a piece of iron in the fire, watching the metal blush. "I built her a girdle once, woven with invisible chains. It made her irresistible to anyone who looked upon her. I gave her the power of her curse. He lets that line hang in the air like smoke. When I caught her with Ares, I didn't rage. I crafted a net so fine it was almost invisible, strong enough to hold them mid-embrace. I didn't do it to shame them. I did it to prove precision can outwit passion. Hephaestus chuckles softly, half proud, half regretful. Of course, the other gods turned it into gossip, laughed for centuries. But even laughter can be forged into a kind of legend. You watch him adjust the bellows, the flames flaring higher. The heat presses against your skin, thick and alive. He doesn't flinch. The thing about fire, he says, is that it doesn't choose what it burns. It just makes everything equal. He pauses, looking at his hands. They still whisper about me being ugly, but beauty fades. Skill doesn't. Even Ares couldn't fix a broken blade. His eyes meet yours, steady and unblinking. Love isn't always a gift. Sometimes it's a workshop, loud, hot, and full of mistakes. You can hear the fatigue under his words, but also pride. You realize that Hephaestus doesn't envy the beautiful or the powerful. He envies those who get to build something and walk away before it breaks. Historians still argue whether his marriage to Aphrodite was meant to symbolize harmony between intellect and desire, or simply to teach that even gods must live with irony. Either way, the myth remains one of the oldest stories about love defined by imbalance, devotion, meeting desire, and finding no middle ground. The forge quiets. The god picks up the sculpted face again, its expression half finished. I keep starting her over, he says. Every century, I think I'll get her right this time. But maybe that's the point. Maybe creation's supposed to hurt. He sets the face aside and nods toward the cooling coals. Go on. The air above will be sweeter. The next one you'll meet prefers perfume to smoke. You follow the flicker of light toward the cavern's exit. The air cools as you climb, and the scent of metal gives way to myrrh and roses. The clang of the forge fades into the faint music of laughter, smooth and practiced. When you reach the surface, you're standing at the edge of a marble courtyard. Candles flicker in carved seashells. Voices murmur. Somewhere nearby, the sound of soft sandals on stone. The scent of roses grows stronger, edged with salt and wine. A figure steps into view, luminous even in shadow. Her smile is the kind that feels both generous and dangerous. Aphrodite has been expecting you. You step into warmth and candlelight, where the night air tastes like roses left in the sun and something more mischievous, honey spiked with sea salt. The marble courtyard opens into a market that isn't exactly on any map. Part Athens, part Cyprus, part dream. Stalls spill with glass unguents, braids of myrrh, baskets of saffron, and little seashell bottles shaped like the goddess's smile. This is where gossip turns liquid. You follow the perfume trail, because that's how you track Aphrodite, by scent before sight. She glides beside you without the courtesy of footsteps, a shimmer in the corner of your eye, amused that you're pretending this is casual. Her voice is the soft purr of surf on warm rock. Mortals always come here looking for forever, she says. They stay for favors. She taps a stoppered vial. Inside, rose oil swirls like captured dawn. The tricky thing about favors? They evaporate. The first story floats up like steam from a brazier. A handsome shepherd on Mount Ida, minding his cows and his business, and then, surprise, the goddess of love in a mortal disguise, playing at blushing and innocence the way other people play at dice. Anchises, you can see him in the smoky reflection of a polished shield at one stall, young and nervous, trying to act like a woman in a veil, doesn't look suspiciously like a sunrise. Aphrodite smiles at the memory, half tender, half wicked. You know how it goes. They fall together. She warns him never to brag. He brags. Zeus hears. Lightning writes a stern note on his spine. A mainstream historical fact slides into the incense. Homeric hymn 5, probably composed in the 7th or 6th century BCE, tells the Anchises tale at length, complete with that one practical moral: if a goddess tells you to keep a secret, maybe don't host a press conference. Historians still argue whether the hymn is teasing divine power or teaching mortals about boundaries in a world where the line between human and holy keeps moving like a shoreline. You drift onward as merchants powder rose petals into dust that smells the exact color of pink. At another stall, a woman grinds cinnamon with wine in a tiny stone mortar. She says it's a Kypris blend, a Cypriot perfume formula that sailors buy for luck in love and calm seas. The vendor winks. Same spell, different targets. The goddess's island, Paphos, hums through the scene like a tuning fork. A carved plaque shows a conical cult stone, aniconic, abstract, the way reverence often begins before we try to put a face on it. Aphrodite leans close. Conspiratorial. Some of my best stories smell like ships. She means Bautes, the Argonaut who couldn't resist the Syrinx. He leaped toward their song, apparently forgetting that don't jump overboard for playlists is a timeless rule. Aphrodite plucked him from the water and set him down gently in Sicily, where, reward or rescue, you can decide. She became his lover and bore him Eryx, a future king whose mountain would one day carry the goddess's temple like a jewel. The market keeps that memory in small objects, shell charms, a few pebbles from a beach, probably not the real one. But who's keeping score? You pause by a display of alabaster jars filled with pale green oil. The label, if you could call chisel marks a label, claims it's the very ointment that changed Phaon. Ah, Phaon, the grumpy ferryman of Lesbos, tired of rowing other people to romance, who gave an old woman a free ride and received a vial of miracle oil in return. She was Aphrodite in disguise. Of course she was. He rubbed the stuff on his skin and walked away, luminous as a sunrise after rain. Suddenly, everyone swooned. Sappho herself, the legend goes, loved him and then lost him when he skittered back into anonymity. A quirky tidbit. Some later storytellers swore that Phaon's salve could only be brewed under a new moon by stirring rose oil with a thorn from a bush that had never been seen to bloom, a recipe that sounds suspiciously like the instructions for your friend's artisanal coffee. Still, the myth gave apothecaries an excuse to sell Phaon oil for centuries, proof that marketing is older than we think. Aphrodite watches you test a drop on your wrist. It warms, then glows faintly. Even you admit your pulse looks prettier. The goddess smiles with a little shrug like, what can I say? It's a gift. You catch the ghost of cicadas outside the courtyard, Tithonus, still buzzing, a reminder that the beautiful isn't always merciful. Past the perfume stalls, a sculptor tends a small table scattered with marble chips and beeswax. He's selling miniature faces, each serene, each almost alive. You know this one, Pygmalion, the man who fell so in love with his own statue that he forgot to eat properly. Aphrodite, amused by the devotion and perhaps flattered by how closely the statue resembled her ideal, breathed life into the stone. The market keeps a version of that miracle in wax. If you warm the little face with your palm, the cheeks blush. It's a parlor trick, sure, but your heart still stutters. Apparently, you're not immune to illusions either. Relatable. People misunderstand me, Aphrodite says, trailing a finger through incense smoke until it braids and spirals. They think I only give desire. I also give recognition. I hold up a mirror and say, "Look, this is how you glow when you're seen." She pauses, amused. Unfortunately, mirrors crack. You drift by a table of tiny clay flasks, ereboloi, painted with dolphins, swans, and a few sassy Eros figures. The vendor insists these are perfect for travelers who wish to carry a drop of charm across borders. You recall that Artemis warned about beauty without patience, and Hephaestus complained that art no one asked for is still art. You're collecting divine advice like seashells now, pockets jangling with contradictory truths. You ask gently about the ones who didn't fare so well, those who turned down the goddess or mocked her favors. Aphrodite's smile cools a degree. Refusal is fine, she says. Contempt is not. She means Hippolytus, the devoted follower of Artemis who rejected all romance. In some tellings, her vengeance came indirect, through Phaedra's doomed desire. She also means Anaxarete of Cyprus, a beauty who mocked the lovesick Iphis until he hanged himself at her door. Aphrodite, displeased, turned the girl to stone. You feel the market's warmth dim for a moment, like a cloud crossing the sun. Then the light returns. A boy runs past carrying peony garlands. A lyre hums from a corner you can't quite see. Maybe that's the honest version of her realm. Delight, braided with danger, every favor a contract with very small print. You pause at a stall where a parchment is pinned beneath a bronze stylus. The script is neat, scholarly, and just a bit defensive. It outlines the old rumor that in Corinth, at Aphrodite's hilltop temple, courtesans served the goddess as part of sacred rites. Historians still argue whether that was ever a real institution or a later slander cooked up by moralists and tourists with vivid imaginations. The parchment concludes with a dry note. Travelers exaggerate. Priests fundraise. You can't help snickering. Some marketing departments truly are immortal. A mainstream historical fact surfaces with the next breeze. The sanctuary of Aphrodite at Paphos on Cyprus was one of the most famous cult centers in the Mediterranean, with pilgrims arriving from as far as Phoenicia and Egypt. Theophrastus, Aristotle's successor, even wrote on odors around the 3rd century BCE, discussing how rose oil and myrrh were prepared, aroma as theology and trade. The market you're walking through feels like those chapters sprouted lanterns and started flirting. Take something, Aphrodite murmurs, not because you need it, because you'll remember how you felt when you smelled it again. She presses a seashell vial into your palm. Inside, the perfume is barely tinted like diluted sunset. You lift it to your nose, roses, salt, and a note you can't name. Maybe the laughter from Hephaestus's forge when a spark escapes. As you tuck the vial away, the goddess tilts her head toward the street beyond the stalls. "One more favor for the night," she says, voice softening. "Someone's going to boast again. He always does." Try not to enjoy it. You follow her gaze down a lane where the pavement brightens like polished cloud. The air picks up a charge that's equal parts ozone and mischief. Somewhere, a swan flaps. Somewhere else, a bull snorts. And in the corner of your vision, a curtain of golden rain thinks it's being subtle. You sigh, fond and tired, like someone who already knows the punchline but loves the delivery. Time to tiptoe through the shapeshifts and the fallout, the mortal romances no poet wanted to explain at family dinners. Zeus is around the corner, changing costumes again, and you, smelling faintly of roses and sea, are about to learn why disguise never disguises consequences. The air crackles with that familiar tension, half static, half scandal. You follow the golden glow through narrow marble alleys that smell faintly of rain and regret. A peal of thunder rolls somewhere above, not angry, just bored, like a god clearing his throat before another performance. You don't need to guess who it is. When the air starts smelling like ozone and charm, Zeus is never far away. You find him lounging on a stone terrace, shirt open to the wind, pretending not to pose. The king of the gods is the kind of man who could set a forest on fire just by complimenting a tree. His hair is cloud-colored, his smile impossible, and there's a perpetual gleam in his eye that says, "I'm thinking of doing something questionable, and it'll probably become a constellation later." "Ah," he says, catching sight of you. "Another mortal wandering through my legend? Don't look so serious. You think the thunder writes itself?" You take a seat across from him, pretending this is an interview and not a lecture on divine multitasking. He gestures broadly toward the horizon where lightning sketches temporary portraits in the sky. "Each one of those," he says, "was a disguise once." And so begins the roll call. The first flash resolves into feathers, a swan gliding across a still lake, wings silver in moonlight. You see a woman standing by the shore, Leda, queen of Sparta, mortal and magnificent. The bird approaches with deceptive grace. The rest, well, you know, that swan wasn't here for breadcrumbs. Later, twin eggs would hatch, Castor and Pollux, or Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra, depending on which poet you ask. The moral? Probably that swans are beautiful, but beauty often hides impact velocity. A mainstream historical fact, the story of Leda and the swan was one of the most popular subjects in classical art. From ancient vase paintings to Renaissance canvases, it symbolized both divine union and violation. Historians still argue whether those depictions were meant to elevate the myth to allegory or just to test the limits of marble modesty. Zeus chuckles at your expression. What? Art needs inspiration. You resist the urge to point out that he might consider getting consent first. The next flash becomes the shape of a bull, muscles rippling like waves. You're on the coast of Phoenicia now, where Princess Europa gathers flowers by the sea. The bull approaches, gentle, gleaming white, eyes softer than milk. She climbs onto his back, laughing, and then, splash, Poseidon's jealous nephew bolts into the surf, carrying her away to Crete. She becomes the mother of kings, her name later stamped on half a continent. Zeus grins unashamed. "She wanted adventure," he says. "I've provided logistics." You sigh. "You mean abduction." He shrugs, unconcerned. Abduction, relocation, destiny. It's all branding. Lightning again. This time not animal, but shimmer, a golden rain falling softly through a tower's roof. Danae, imprisoned by her father in a bronze chamber because an oracle predicted her son would overthrow him. Zeus, always one for irony, seeps through the cracks as light itself. Later comes Perseus, slayer of Medusa, rescuer of Andromeda, hero with serious daddy issues. You can't help but notice the pattern. You change form, get what you want, and then leave mortals to clean up the mythic mess. He leans forward, amused. That's one interpretation. Historians still argue whether Zeus's transformations were symbolic, sunlight fertilizing earth, rain-feeding crops, or just mythic shorthand for power disguised as intimacy. Either way, the stories endure, proving that even immortality can't resist repetition. You ask if he ever regretted any of it. For a moment, his smile falters. Once, he says, her name was Semele. The lightning dims to candlelight. You see a mortal woman, gentle-eyed, pregnant with a secret she doesn't understand. Hera, ever suspicious, whispers poison into her ear. If he truly loves you, make him show his divine form. Semele does, and Zeus appears in his full thunderous glory. The mortal body can't withstand that kind of revelation. She burns, leaving behind an unborn child, Dionysus, whom Zeus hides in his thigh until birth. Zeus exhales. I tried to be less, to dim the light, but she wanted truth, and truth burns. The admission lingers, heavier than thunder. You realize that beneath all his swagger, Zeus knows exactly what he is, a force that both creates and destroys without trying. It's lonely, he admits softly, being seen only through disguises. A quirky tidbit slips in with the breeze. In ancient Dodona, worshippers interpreted the rustling of oak leaves as Zeus's voice. The priests would record answers to questions on thin lead tablets like divine text messages from the wind. One surviving inscription reads simply, "Should I trust love that comes in disguise?" You imagine the leaves trembling with laughter before answering, "Only if you enjoy stories with thunder at the end." You glance at Zeus. Do you ever worry your disguises taught mortals the wrong lesson? He smiles faintly. Mortals already knew how to pretend. I just perfected the art form. There's a flash of genuine warmth in his eyes, lightning without destruction. Still, he adds, I envy your kind. You break, but you mend. We just keep echoing. Thunder grumbles in the distance, gentler now. The god leans back and the storm begins to quiet itself, clouds folding into dusk. Enough about me, he says, waving a hand. You've walked the heights and depths, seen dawn and moonlight, heard the forges and flutes. You should rest among fields for a while. There's a woman there who understands loss better than any of us. He means Demeter. You can tell by the sudden scent of wheat and warm earth drifting through the cooling air. The golden dust of harvest floats in from nowhere, sparkling against the retreating storm. Zeus stretches, cracking the sky like knuckles. Tell my sister I said hello, he says. She'll ignore it, of course. You thank him for the stories. He grins, thunder rumbling in approval. They're not stories, he says. They're weather forecasts. You step away down the path of golden dust that smells of ripe grain and summer rain. The sea, the moon, the forge, all fade behind you. Ahead lies the quiet rhythm of farmland, the hush between planting and reaping. You already know who waits among those whispering stalks, a goddess whose love once fed the world and then starved it in grief. Demeter is waiting in the fields, and she's not alone. The storm's echo fades into the hum of crickets and wind over ripened fields. The air is thick with the perfume of barley and wild thyme, and underfoot the soil feels alive, warm, yielding, pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of the earth itself. You walk along a path of scattered petals and broken wheat stalks until you see her, kneeling beside a field turned gold by the dying sun. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, looks both majestic and utterly human. Her hair falls in braids streaked with straw and silver, and her hands are stained with the dirt of her own devotion. She doesn't wear a crown. She wears exhaustion like jewelry. When she looks up, her eyes gleam with something more powerful than lightning. Grief tempered into wisdom. Zeus sent you, didn't he? She says, not unkindly, just resigned. He always does when the world's too quiet. You nod, unsure whether to bow or just stand still. She motions for you to sit beside her on a bundle of cut stalks. Don't worry, she adds softly. The earth listens better when we whisper. The air hums with insects, the steady rhythm of life doing what it always does, growing, dying, growing again. Demeter traces circles in the soil with her fingertip, small spirals that look almost like the patterns left by snails after rain. She's gone again, she murmurs. You know who she means before she says it. Persephone, her daughter, the spring goddess, half the reason mortals even have seasons. When she returns, Demeter continues, the fields bloom without asking. When she leaves, I let them rest. Rest is a polite word for mourning. You tell her the world still remembers the story, that Persephone spends part of each year in the underworld with Hades, and that Demeter's sorrow turns the earth barren. She smiles faintly, a sad smile that bends at the corners like a wilted stalk. They remember the rhythm, she says, not the reasons. Before Hades and the pomegranate seeds and the compromise of time sharing the seasons, there were others who comforted her, forgotten names like echoes buried under centuries of soil. Mortals think gods don't crave kindness, she says, but once I did. The first name she speaks is Iashian, a mortal prince, son of Zeus and Electra, handsome, strong, and very mortal. They met, as most mythic couples do, in a field. It was the night of a great feast, and Demeter slipped away from Olympus to walk among mortals, barefoot in the stubble after harvest. Iashian found her there, and, not recognizing her divinity, offered her bread, baked with honey. Simple, sweet, mortal, she recalls, her voice gentling. I hadn't tasted anything so honest in centuries. They lay together in the thrice-plowed field, the earth still warm from the day's labor, the stars blinking lazily above. The story should have ended there, soft and secret, but Zeus, jealous of anything he didn't start, struck Iashian down with a thunderbolt. A mainstream historical fact. That field in Crete, sacred to Iashian and Demeter, was later identified with a site near Knossos, where early Minoan altars were found. Archaeologists unearthed terracotta figurines of couples intertwined among stalks of grain, perhaps echoes of the divine liaison. Historians still argue whether the story symbolizes the fertility of soil after plowing or the danger of mortals sharing intimacy with the gods. Demeter plucks a strand of wheat and twirls it between her fingers. He burned, she says simply, and from the ash barley sprouted. Even grief grows something. Her gaze drifts toward the horizon, where a faint mist curls above the fields. They think I went cold after that, she continues, that I built my temple at Eleusis to be alone, but I built it to remember. You've heard of Eleusis, the sacred city near Athens, where her mysteries were held for nearly 2,000 years. Pilgrims walked miles in silence to reach it, carrying torches and barley grains, hoping to glimpse the secrets of life, death, and rebirth. We taught them, she says, that the earth's sorrow feeds its renewal, that descent isn't the end, just the middle. A quirky tidbit. During the Eleusinian mysteries, initiates were forbidden to speak of what they witnessed. But some ancient graffiti near the site reveals small clues, drawings of poppies, torches, and sheaves of wheat, accompanied by phrases like, I saw, I learned, I hope. Modern scholars still debate whether these rituals were theatrical or genuinely spiritual. Demeter tilts her head toward you. Hope is the only crop that never stops growing, she says, even in famine. You ask her if she ever forgave Hades. She smiles faintly, eyes glinting gold. He didn't steal her, she says. He offered her a kingdom. I just wasn't ready to share. She sighs, brushing soil from her palms. We like to think we own love when it comes from us, but love is a seed. It grows where it wants. The fields rustle as if agreeing. Fireflies flicker above the grain like tiny lanterns of memory. She rises, dusting herself off, and walks toward a small stone altar at the field's edge. It's old, cracked, overgrown with vines, but alive, pulsing with quiet warmth. She places a handful of wheat there, then turns to you. Mortals used to leave offerings like this, she says. Bread, honey, milk. I never needed them. I only wanted them to remember where their food came from. A soft breeze lifts her hair. You notice something behind her. Shadows moving, faint and fleeting. Figures of men and women, their faces blurred but kind, walking the fields beside her. The forgotten comforts, she says, nodding to them. They were mortal. They came and went like seasons. Their names are lost, but the feeling remains. When the wind touches your face on a warm evening, that's them saying we remember too. The moment holds. The air smells like cut hay and forgiveness. Historians still argue whether Demeter's myths were agricultural allegory or early theology, a bridge between the natural and the divine. You suspect they were both, and neither. Maybe she's just the embodiment of every parent, lover, and farmer who's ever had to let something go to see it return. Demeter touches your cheek, her fingers cool and grain-scented. The earth always mends itself, she whispers. You should learn to do the same. Then she smiles, not radiant, but restful, and the wheat around you bends in a long, slow bow. The wind carries the scent of wine and grapes next, heavier, sweeter, a promise of celebration to follow sorrow. Demeter's voice follows you as you step away. Tell my daughter's husband his festivals are too loud. But dance anyway. The air grows heady with laughter and music as the fields melt into vineyard terraces. The moon climbs higher, and lanterns bob among the vines like drifting stars. The ground hums with footsteps, tambourines, and the slosh of wine poured too generously. You've entered Dionysus's realm now, where love is louder, where the heart trades sorrow for song. You walk downhill into warmth and rhythm. The night air pulses with the scent of crushed grapes, figs, and torch smoke, thick enough to taste. Somewhere ahead, someone laughs, a deep rolling sound that turns into music halfway through. Vines twist over marble columns like serpents, drunk on their own perfume. Drums throb, flutes chatter. The ground under your feet hums with a heartbeat that isn't yours. Dionysus is throwing a party. He finds you before you find him. Of course he does. The god of wine and frenzy is hard to miss. Dark curls, ivy crown askew, eyes gleaming with that dangerous mix of joy and tragedy that mortals mistake for charm. He's dancing barefoot in the vineyard mud, his robe streaked with wine and glitter. When he sees you, he grins as if you were a long-lost friend or a good story he hasn't told in centuries. Welcome to sobriety's funeral, he says, tossing you a clay cup already half full. Drink before you remember why you shouldn't. You hesitate. He laughs. Suit yourself. I've been toasted by kings and scolded by priests. You'll do neither, I hope. Around him, the maenads whirl. Women with hair unbound, wreaths of ivy sliding down their shoulders. Satyrs leap and pipe. cloven hooves keeping impossible time. The air hums with liberation, the kind that's part joy, part danger. You realize this isn't chaos, it's catharsis, the heartbeat of every festival that ever let people forget themselves for a while. Dionysus leads you through the vines, talking in that half-singing tone of his, words rippling like water. They call me mad, he says, but madness is just truth that got tired of waiting. He plucks a cluster of grapes and crushes it between his hands. The juice runs down his wrists like blood and sunrise mixed together. Everyone remembers my revels, he says. Fewer remember my bride. The music softens, the vines hush, even the wind leans closer. Ariadne, he says, almost tenderly. You know that name? The Cretan princess who saved Theseus from the labyrinth, then watched him sail away while she slept, abandoned on Naxos, wrapped in the sea's indifferent hush. I found her there, Dionysus says. Or she found me. Hard to tell when the sea's involved. He gestures, and the vineyard melts into shoreline. You smell salt and violets. The sand glitters under moonlight like spilled sugar. Ariadne lies curled on a rock, her crown, a delicate wreath of gold and myrtle, tipped sideways. She looks like someone who's used up all her tears and started saving silence instead. I told her, he says, that forgetting was a kind of art. He sits beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked at me the way mortals look at sunrise, hopeful but suspicious. Smart girl. You can see her stir, the faintest movement, like a wave deciding whether to return. When her eyes open, the sadness in them meets his madness halfway, and something new begins. Reckless, healing, luminous. A mainstream historical fact drifts through the sea breeze. Ariadne's image appeared on Cretan coins by the 5th century BCE, often crowned with ivy or holding a serpent staff, symbols borrowed from Dionysus himself. Historians still argue whether she was absorbed into his cult as a goddess or remembered as a mortal elevated by love. A quirky tidbit? In some late Hellenistic plays, drunken poets claimed the constellation Corona Borealis, the northern crown, was her wedding tiara, tossed into the sky by Dionysus as a gift. Astronomers today still call it that. You can step outside on a clear June night, look between Hercules and Bootes, and see their marriage glittering quietly, never setting. Dionysus chuckles, watching you take in the vision. I didn't rescue her, he says. I just reminded her she could dance again. He takes your wrist and spins you once, twice, until the vineyard reforms around you, and the stars whirl overhead like spilled wine. You mortals think tragedy ends with silence, he says. But I know better. Tragedy ends with song. He lifts his cup and drinks deeply. Wine stains his lips the color of pomegranates. Love and madness are siblings, he continues. Both make mortals touch the divine. The difference is, madness doesn't apologize afterward. You laugh despite yourself, the sounds swept up by tambourines. The maenads have circled again, and the satyrs stamp their hooves. The gods' laughter rises over it all, contagious, electric. For a heartbeat, the whole world feels alive and forgiven. Then, just as suddenly, the noise dims. Dionysus looks toward the dark horizon. She sleeps now, he says quietly. Immortal or dreaming, I never remember which. When mortals love gods, the border between the two blurs. That's the only miracle worth repeating. You ask him if he ever sees her crown in the night sky. His smile softens. Every time I close my eyes, I made sure she'd never fall again. the torches gutter, painting the vineyard in golden shadow. Dionysus stands steady now, less wild, more divine. Go, he says. Before the music starts over, you'll think it's joy, but it's the same old ache with better rhythm. You start to leave, but he calls after you. Remember, little wanderer, love isn't about possession. It's about echo. He raises his cup in salute, and echoes, when they fade, still make the air tremble. As you walk up the hill, the drums resume behind you, softer now, merging with the chirp of night insects. The vineyard gives way to stone ruins, their columns half buried in moonlight. Statues linger here, bodies frozen mid-embrace, lips almost touching, eyes that once looked at each other now staring into eternity. The air tastes of dust and marble, the sweetness of grapes replaced by the cool dryness of memory. You run your hand along a cracked sculpture and feel a pulse beneath the stone, faint but stubborn. The next story is already whispering, not of living lovers, but of those whose passion turned them into permanence. Echoes of love turned stone. The laughter of Dionysus fades behind you, replaced by a silence so complete it almost hums. The path winds upward through broken columns and statues missing their faces, a graveyard of gestures. The moonlight drips across marble shoulders, pooling in the hollow where eyes once were. You feel like you're walking through the afterlife of beauty itself. Love stories stopped mid-sentence. The wind shifts, carrying a whisper that isn't quite wind. A voice trying to finish a word that never ends. You turn and see her, Echo. She stands near a fallen pillar, her body translucent, edges blurred like a reflection in rippling water. Her mouth moves a half second after yours does. You, she repeats softly, testing the sound like a child tasting honey. Her eyes are luminous and sad. You remember the myth, the talkative nymph who distracted Hera with chatter while Zeus entertained himself elsewhere. Punished for her kindness, she could only repeat the last word she heard, doomed to be an echo, never a voice, until she saw him. Narcissus, you whisper, and she nods. The scene shifts again. The forest turns greener, younger, alive with the smell of pine sap and dew. There he is, the beautiful boy gazing into his reflection, utterly captivated by himself. Echo watches from behind a tree, her own name lost to the curse that silenced her. When she finally gathers the courage to step forward, she can only mimic his words. Who's there? He calls. There, she replies. Come, he shouts. Come, she echoes. He smiles, thinking it's a game, until she reveals herself and reaches for him. But love that mirrors itself can't touch. Narcissus recoils, horrified not by her but by his own reflection in her longing. He flees to the pool, stares into the water, and falls in love with his own image. She fades away until nothing remains but voice, disembodied and eternal. Echo gestures toward the pool that still glimmers nearby. He's gone, she whispers, but he never left. A mainstream historical fact surfaces like the ripples of that doomed pond. The myth of Narcissus first appears in Ovid's Metamorphoses, written around 8 CE as part of his sweeping catalogue of transformations. Historians still argue whether it was a warning against vanity or a meditation on the human soul's obsession with reflection, its inability to love what's real. A quirky tidbit? The actual flower, the narcissus, blooms in early spring beside rivers throughout Greece. Some ancient physicians brewed its bulb into a sedative. Others claimed it induced prophetic dreams. Sleep of mirrors, they called it. You wonder how many dreamers saw their own faces and mistook them for ghosts. Echo looks at you, her lips trembling as if she wants to say more but can't. You reach out, and for a moment, she copies the gesture exactly, hand raised toward your hand. When your fingers meet, there's no sensation, just vibration, a brief harmony between two frequencies that can't quite touch. "I'm not lonely," she insists, her voice fragmenting, each syllable scattering like pebbles in a well. I'm everywhere." You hear her even when you close your eyes, your own breathing doubled, repeated, softened. Maybe she's right. Maybe every whisper of wind through stone is her practicing conversation again. The air shifts. A faint scratching sound draws your attention to the next ruin, a statue half buried in vines. It's a man kneeling, arms outstretched, his expression caught between awe and despair. A sculptor's chisel lies broken at his feet. You know this story too. Pygmalion, the artist who fell in love with his own creation. He carved her from ivory, so perfect, so alive, that he forgot she wasn't. Every night he spoke to her, dressed her, kissed her, prayed to Aphrodite for a miracle. And being in a generous mood, the goddess obliged. When he returned home, the statue's skin was warm, the lips soft, the eyes blinking open like dawn through fog. It should have been a happy ending, but the statue, now called Galatea, never asked to be born from someone else's desire. You can almost hear her thinking, what happens to love when the sculptor stops carving? Historians still argue whether the myth was meant as a celebration of art's power or a warning about obsession, the desire to control beauty instead of witness it. In Roman houses, small frescoes of Pygmalion's moment of awakening decorated bedrooms and gardens, because apparently no one sees the irony in hanging a painting about loving statues on their walls. A quirky tidbit. During the Renaissance, apprentices in sculptors' workshops used to kiss finished busts for luck, muttering, "Wake well, Galatea." Some said the stone felt warm afterward. Others said that was just embarrassment. Either way, the echo of that superstition still clings to marble museums where tourists can't resist brushing fingertips along polished limbs. You move among the statues. Lovers turn to stone, stone pretending to love back. There's Niobe, frozen mid-plea as Apollo's arrows descend on her children. There's Mira, transformed into a tree to escape her own unbearable shame. Her tears now resin that perfumers still call myrrh. Every figure is a heartbeat arrested, every surface an echo of longing that never resolved. The wind picks up, whistling through broken archways, and the sound becomes music, soft, mournful, ancient. Echo's voice threads through it, blending with the hum of stone. "We stay," she murmurs, "because someone might remember." You tilt your head and realize the entire ruin is singing, a chorus of preserved moments, lovers and losses vibrating in the moonlight. It's haunting, but not sad. More like acceptance carved in melody. You think of Hephaestus shaping bronze, of Eos watching wrinkles bloom on Tithonus' skin, of Selene sleeping shepherd, of Hades turning grief into gardens. Every story so far has ended in transformation. Maybe that's the only kind of immortality love can promise. Not permanence, but change that refuses to die. You walk to the edge of the ruins where the marble gives way to bare rock. Beyond it, the horizon flickers with starlight. Echo's whisper follows. You hear us, so we're still real. The stars above seem closer now, humming faintly, as though waiting for their turn to speak. You realize some of them are constellations named for these very stories. Daphne's laurel crown, Orion's belt, Ariadne's wreath, even memory becomes sky eventually. The air grows cooler, the statues fade behind you, their whispers folding into the wind. The path ahead glows faintly, leading toward a valley where night itself seems to shimmer. The stars pulse brighter, and for a moment you think you can hear their distant conversation, the gods themselves murmuring in their sleep. You feel the pull of it, the end approaching, the slow unraveling of all these immortal loves into legend and silence. The world softens, its edges turning to mist. The old gods are fading, and you, drowsy traveler, are drifting toward their twilight. You follow the last breath of the wind through the marble ruins until the path dissolves into starlight. The world grows quieter, the kind of quiet that hums just above hearing, a hush too vast to belong to earth. The constellations shimmer brighter now, not as scattered pinpricks, but as a living canopy. You're not walking anymore. You're gliding through the air itself, floating in that velvet space between myth and memory. Somewhere above, the gods are whispering in their sleep. You recognize their voices, faint but familiar. Eos humming her dawn lullaby, Selene sighing over her shepherd, Pan's reed music threading between the stars. Each sound fades into the next until the sky becomes one long exhale. You're not sure when the light changes, only that the stars begin to dim at the edges. Ahead of you, the heavens themselves seem to ripple, as if time has finally decided to rest. You drift closer and find a figure standing at the edge of it all, where night meets dawn. A woman, or maybe just light-shaped like one, her robe shifting through every color that ever existed. It's not one goddess, but all of them, or maybe just the idea of divinity itself. The collective sigh of the old myths, watching themselves dissolve. Her hair is braided with constellations, and her voice sounds like the wind over fields. The ocean's edge, the forge's hiss, every element you've passed through tonight. You've walked a long way, she says. Her tone is soft, amused, impossibly kind. Do you understand them now? The gods and their loves? You hesitate. You want to say yes, but the words won't come. She nods, smiling as if that's the right answer. Good, because understanding isn't what keeps stories alive. It's remembering. The stars pulse brighter for a moment, as though nodding in agreement. Around you, their light flickers into shapes, the very lovers you've met. Eos and her wrinkled Tithonus drift together across the horizon, a pale pink blur that looks suspiciously like sunrise. Selene rides her chariot overhead, moonlight cascading down her shoulders. Pan's silhouette dances through a stand of celestial reeds. Even Hades appears, his poplar trees sprouting faint silver leaves that tremble in non-existent wind. Apollo glows gold near the horizon, fingers brushing his lyre strings. Artemis watches him from a shadowed cloud, her bow lowered, expression unreadable. Poseidon rises briefly in a column of water that becomes mist before it can roar. And somewhere behind them all, you can almost see the outline of Demeter, her field spreading like an eternal heartbeat beneath their feet. Dionysus leans against a constellation of vines, raising his cup to the night, Ariadne's crown gleaming faintly above him. Even the statues you left behind in the ruins seem to sigh, their stone forms softening into the starlight, their edges melting into air. Zeus appears last, distant but unmistakable, surrounded by faint flickers of lightning that never strike. His gaze is less smug now, more thoughtful. Mortals, he murmurs, shaking his head. Always rewriting us? You can't help smiling. Someone has to keep the stories interesting. He laughs, a sound like gentle thunder. Then keep doing it. We fade when you stop talking. The great figure beside you, the light that is all gods and none, reaches out, brushing her hand across your shoulder. Do you know what happens to forgotten lovers? She asks. You shake your head. They don't die, she says. They turn into echoes, or trees, or stars, or flowers. The world refuses to waste devotion. It's such a quiet truth that it settles into you like warmth after rain. You think of Eos's dew, of Mintha's mint, of Hyacinthus's flower. Love, it seems, always leaves residue. Historians still argue whether myths were born to explain the world or to explain ourselves. But standing here, surrounded by fading gods and their glittering remnants, you realize it's both. Every story was an attempt to make chaos gentler, to give heartbreak a rhythm that could be remembered out loud. The forgotten lovers weren't forgotten at all. They just changed forms, waiting for someone like you to walk through their memories again. A quirky detail drifts through your drowsy mind. There's a word in ancient Greek, aletheia, that means truth, but its root literally translates to unforgetting. Maybe truth was never about facts, but about the act of remembering what matters, even when the world moves on. You look down, though down no longer makes sense, and see the earth glowing far below, quilted with seas and mountains. Every place you visited tonight still shines faintly. Olympus wrapped in mist, Latmos' sleeping hill, the marsh where Pan's song lingers, the fields of Eleusis breathing softly in gold. Humanity's dreams are stitched into the planet's skin like constellations turned inward. The goddess light smiles again. It's time, she whispers. Your mortal eyes grow heavy. The constellations begin to dim one by one, each fading with a sigh. Orion lowers his bow. The laurel leaves of Daphne's crown shimmer, then scatter into dust. The stars don't go out all at once. They yawn, stretch, and curl into sleep. The sky becomes a cradle. You lie back in it, weightless. The night folds around you, soft as breath. Somewhere, a flute plays. Pan again, though slower now, like the wind through reeds half asleep. The sound carries traces of every story. Eos's longing, Selene's tenderness, Apollo's mourning, Aphrodite's laughter, Demeter's patience. You feel them blending into one melody, familiar and infinite. Your eyelids grow heavy. The goddess's voice fades into a whisper. Even the gods dreamed of being loved. You just dream of them back. And now the wind down begins. Slowly, gently, the world easing into rest. The sky hums low and deep, a heartbeat under silence. You float through warmth that feels like blankets fresh from the sun, the kind that smell faintly of pine and smoke. The edges of thought blur, softening like candle wax. Time unspools. Distance sighs itself away. You think of all the lovers, divine and mortal alike, not as tragedies but as lullabies, each ending a note, resolving into calm. The shepherd still sleeps, the forge still glows, the sea still murmurs under its breath. The moon watches, patient, while dawn rehearses its entrance on the other side of the world. Your breathing slows, syncing with the rhythm of something ancient and kind. The stars above you blur into a single glow, the soft pulse of stories too old to die and too gentle to vanish. Somewhere in the quiet, Echo's voice returns, barely a murmur now. Still here? You smile without opening your eyes. You don't need to answer. She knows. The gods fade, the myths dissolve, and the last sound is the hush of your own heartbeat echoing in the dark. Steady, human, alive.